Poor fisher girl saved a guy on the beach, not knowing he's a millionaire and would change her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet shoreline of a small coastal town. The waves rolled in steady and strong, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. Out there, barefoot on the damp sand, moved a young woman carrying her worn fishing nets. Her name was Lila. She was known among the locals as the fisher girl, the daughter of a family that had struggled for generations to make ends meet. Lila's life was hard. Every morning, before the market even opened, she was already at work. She would cast her nets, mend the tiers, and haul in whatever the ocean was willing to give. Some days it was enough to sell. Other days it was barely enough to feed her younger brother and her ailing grandmother. Yet she never complained. Her hands were calloused, her clothes patched and faded, but her spirit remained steady. She was resilient, and she carried herself with quiet dignity that even poverty could not take away. On this particular morning, something unusual caught her attention. At first, she thought it was driftwood, floating where the tide broke. But then she saw movement, an arm, a head sinking beneath the waves. Her heart pounded. Someone was drowning. "Help!" The cry was faint, swallowed quickly by the roar of the ocean. Lila dropped her nets without hesitation and sprinted into the water. The cold salt water rose up to her waist, then her chest, as she fought the current. Every muscle in her body burned, but she kept going. She reached the stranger, a man in clothes far too fine for this beach, and wrapped her arm around him. He was unconscious, his body limp, but still breathing faintly. With sheer determination, she dragged him back toward the shore. The sand scraped her knees as she pulled him out of the surf, coughing and gasping for breath herself. She pushed the wet hair from his face, noticing how pale he was, how sharp his features were even in this vulnerable state. Whoever he was, he did not belong here. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing down on his chest to force the water out. Her small frame shook with exhaustion, but she refused to give up. Finally, the man coughed violently, expelling seawater, and opened his eyes for just a brief second. They were dark, piercing eyes that seemed to lock onto hers before fluttering closed again. Relief flooded through her. He was alive. But Lila had no idea that the man she just rescued was not an ordinary tourist. He was someone whose very name carried weight in business towers and boardrooms across the country. She had saved a millionaire, though for now, he was nothing more than a stranger on the sand, his life hanging by a thread, and she was the only one standing between him and death. That morning, Lila thought she had only saved a man from the sea. She could not yet imagine that she had also changed the course of her own life forever. The man lay on the sand, his chest rising and falling unevenly. His lips were pale, and his fine shirt clung to his body, drenched from the salt water. Lila pressed her hand gently against his forehead. He was burning with fever from the shock of nearly drowning. She knew that if she left him there, the cold morning wind could take his life before help arrived. With no time to think twice, she hooked her arms under his and pulled with all her strength. Inch by inch, she dragged him across the beach until she reached her small wooden hut by the shore. The structure was modest, its walls patched with driftwood, and its roof thatched with palm leaves, but it was the only shelter she had to offer. Inside, she laid him carefully on her woven mat. Her younger brother peeked from the corner, wide-eyed at the sight of the stranger. "Who is he, Lila?" the boy whispered. "I do not know," she answered softly. "But he needs our help." She lit a small fire and boiled water. She wrung out a cloth and pressed it to the man's forehead. The seawater had left his skin cold, yet his body trembled as though caught between heat and chill. His breathing was shallow, but steady enough to give her hope. After a long silence, the stranger stirred. His eyes fluttered open, dazed, searching the unfamiliar ceiling of the hut. He blinked, then turned his head slightly toward Lila. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze, but then he seemed to focus. "You saved me," he rasped, his voice hoarse from swallowing seawater. Lila gave him a faint smile, relieved to see him conscious. "You nearly drowned, Try not to move too much. You are safe now." The man swallowed hard, his throat raw. Where am I?" "You are in my home near the fishing docks," Lila explained. "You collapsed on the beach. I brought you here until you are strong enough to stand." He looked around, taking in the simplicity of the hut, the worn net in the corner, the chipped clay bowls, the scent of wood smoke and seawater. It was clear this was no place of wealth or comfort, yet the care in which she tended him carried more warmth than any luxury hotel. "I should not trouble you," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "You are no trouble," Lila replied firmly. "A life is a life. If I had walked away, you would not be breathing now. Rest, that is all you need to do." The man closed his eyes briefly, as though the weight of exhaustion was too much to resist. Still, something in his expression softened. He was not used to this, the kindness of someone who asked for nothing in return. Minutes passed in quiet, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, as though gathering strength, he spoke again. "My name is Adrian." Lila repeated it softly, almost to herself. Adrian. She did not recognize it. To her, it was simply the name of a man she had rescued from the waves. "Thank you," Adrian said, his voice steadier now. "I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing," she insisted, shaking her head. "The ocean nearly claimed you, that is all. Tomorrow you will be strong enough to leave, and that will be enough for me." Adrian studied her face, the determination in her eyes, the way her words carried no expectation. He had known many people in his life, but none who spoke like this without calculation, without desire for gain. Before his strength gave out again, he reached for his wrist. A watch hung there, cracked and waterlogged, its glass broken by the waves. He tried to remove it, but his hand trembled too much. Lila gently stopped him. "Do not strain yourself," she said. But Adrian managed to unfasten the watch and held it out to her. "Please, keep this. A reminder of today." Lila frowned, hesitant to take something that looked far too valuable for someone like her. "I cannot accept this." "You can," he replied weakly. "It no longer works, but it will remind us both. I want to remember the girl who pulled me back from death." Her fingers hovered, then closed around the damaged watch. It was heavier than she expected, cool against her skin. She tucked it carefully beside the fire. Adrian's eyes drifted closed again, but not before he whispered, "You have given me more than you know." Lila looked at him, puzzled. To her, she had only done what anyone with a conscience would do. Yet in that small hut by the sea, a connection had been planted, one that neither of them could yet understand, but that would change both of their lives in ways they could never imagine. The night stretched long and heavy, with the sound of the waves echoing beyond the hut's thin walls. Lila sat near the fire, mending one of her fishing nets by hand. She kept glancing toward Adrian, who slept fitfully, his breathing uneven but stronger than before. The broken watch rested on the small wooden shelf beside her, glinting faintly in the firelight. She wondered why it mattered so much to him, why he insisted she keep it. Her younger brother stirred from his corner and asked in a sleepy voice, "Will he be all right, Lila?" She looked at Adrian, then back at her brother. "Yes," she answered quietly. "He is strong. The sea tried to take him, but he will live." The boy nodded and curled back to sleep, trusting her words. But Lila herself was not entirely sure. She had seen men lost to the ocean before, fishermen swallowed by storms who never returned. Adrian had been lucky, and she could not help but wonder what had driven him into the dangerous waters in the first place. By dawn, Adrian stirred again. His face was less pale, and when his eyes opened, there was more clarity in them. He tried to sit up, and though his body protested, he managed with Lila's support. "You should not push yourself," she cautioned. "Your body has not yet recovered." Adrian gave her a faint smile. "I have already taken too much of your kindness. I do not wish to burden you further." "You are not a burden," Lila replied firmly. "If you can stand, you can leave when you are ready. But until then, you are safe here." He studied her, searching her expression for any trace of resentment, but found none. She was calm, direct, almost matter-of-fact about saving his life. It unsettled him, in a strange and humbling way. Lila handed him a clay bowl of warm broth she had prepared from fish and seaweed. He accepted it with trembling hands, sipping slowly. The flavor was simple, salty and earthy, but he could feel the warmth spreading through him. "This is good," Adrian said quietly. It is not much, she answered, but it will give you strength. For a while they sat in silence, the fire between them crackling softly. Adrian's gaze drifted to the shelf, where his broken watch rested. He reached for it instinctively, but his hands faltered. You kept it safe, he murmured. You asked me to, Lila replied, almost teasing. But it does not even work anymore. Why is it so important? Adrian's eyes lingered on the watch. It was a gift, he said finally, his voice quieter. From someone who wanted me to remember what really matters. Perhaps it breaking is a lesson I needed. Lila tilted her head, curious at his cryptic words. She sensed there was more to him than he let on, but she did not press. Everyone carried secrets. She had her own, too, the loneliness of holding her family together after her parents passed. The endless struggle against debts that threatened to swallow them whole. Adrian looked at her then, truly looked. He noticed the calluses on her hands, the faded patches on her clothes, the lines of weariness around her young eyes. She was clearly poor, yet she carried herself with pride, with a quiet grace that no hardship could erase. You have done more for me than anyone else ever has, Adrian said softly. Why? Lila blinked at the question. Because you were drowning. Because no one deserves to die alone on the shore. He let her words sink in. He had spent years in boardrooms, surrounded by people who calculated every favor, every relationship, as if life itself were a transaction. Yet here was a woman who risked her life for a stranger and asked for nothing in return. He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion tugging at his body again, but his mind was sharper now. He knew he would leave this hut soon. Yet something inside him stirred an awareness that this meeting was not an accident. Before sleep claimed him again, he spoke once more. Lila, may I see you again when I am well? She hesitated, surprised by the question. If fate allows it, she answered simply, gathering her net in her lap. Adrian smiled faintly, closing his eyes. The fire flickered, casting shadows across the hut. In that moment, something had been planted, a seed of connection between the girl of the sea and the man she believed to be a wandering stranger. Neither of them knew it yet, but that seed would grow into something powerful, something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about fate, wealth, and love. The following morning, the sky was painted with streaks of orange and gold, yet Lila's routine did not change. Long before most of the village was awake, she was already out at the shoreline, carrying her nets over her shoulder. Her life did not pause simply because a stranger rested in her hut. Fish still needed to be caught, debts still needed to be paid, and mouths still needed to be fed. Adrian, though still weak, had insisted on stepping outside. Wrapped in a spare cloak Lila had given him, he sat quietly on a rock near the hut, watching her work. For the first time, he saw her world clearly, the cracked boats tied to crooked wooden posts, the fishermen with faces lined from years of hardship, and the women bartering fish for rice at the market stalls. He saw the way people looked at Lila too, some with pity, others with quiet disdain. A group of wealthier townsfolk passed by, dressed in fine clothes that contrasted sharply with the rough garments of the fishermen. One of them sneered loud enough for Adrian to hear. The fisher girl will never escape the nets she was born into. No matter how hard she works, she will always smell of salt and fish. The others laughed, their voices carrying across the sand. Lila did not respond. She had heard these words before. She kept her eyes on her nets, her movements steady, as though their cruelty did not reach her. But Adrian, sitting a short distance away, clenched his jaw. He was unused to being powerless, unused to hearing such words thrown so carelessly at someone who had risked her life for him. Later, when she returned with her catch, Adrian helped her carry the basket, though he staggered under the weight. "You should not do this," she said firmly. "You are not healed." "I need to try," Adrian replied. "I cannot simply watch while you shoulder everything." Lila gave him a look of disbelief. "You could barely stand yesterday. Do not hurt yourself for pride." "It is not pride," he said, struggling to balance the basket. "It is gratitude." She softened slightly at his words, but took the basket from him anyway. "Then repay me by resting. That is all I ask." As the day wore on, Adrian observed more of her life. He watched as she haggled at the market, only to be cheated by wealthier traders who took advantage of her desperation. He saw her give the best portion of food to her younger brother, keeping only scraps for herself. He listened as villagers whispered about her father's debts and how the family would likely lose what little they owned. Through it all, Lila remained unbroken. She carried herself with dignity, even when insulted, even when cheated. She worked until her hands bled, but she never begged, never bent her head. That night, back at the hut, Adrian could not hold back his frustration. "Why do you endure this? Why do you let them treat you this way?" Lila looked at him steadily. "Because life does not change with anger. The sea teaches patience. Some days it gives, some days it takes. I cannot fight the tide. I can only keep standing." Her words struck him harder than he expected. In his world, power solved everything. Money silenced. Critics. Influence bent rules. Yet here was a woman who lived with nothing, and still managed to hold herself taller than those who mocked her. He glanced again at the broken watch on the shelf. For the first time, he wondered if fate had placed him in this hut not simply to be saved, but to see something he had forgotten: the strength that does not come from wealth, but from resilience. Before he lay down to rest, Adrian spoke softly. "Lila, I want you to know, the world does not see you as I do. They see a fisher girl. I see someone far greater." Lila paused, caught off guard by his sincerity. She said nothing, only lowered her gaze, and continued mending her net. But inside, his words lingered, warming a place in her heart that had long been untouched. Neither of them spoke further that night, but both understood something had shifted. Amid hardship and prejudice, a fragile bond was growing stronger. What had begun as a rescue was slowly becoming something far more powerful, something neither could deny. Days passed, and Adrian's strength returned. Though his body still carried the weight of exhaustion, his steps grew firmer, his breathing steadier. One morning, before Lila awoke, he walked alone to the edge of the shore. The tide rolled in, the same tide that had nearly claimed his life, but now he stood tall against it. He looked back at the hut, the humble walls, the smoke from the small fire. The life of a girl who had nothing yet gave everything. By midday, he approached Lila. "It is time," he said gently. "I cannot stay here any longer. You have done more for me than I can ever repay." Lila met his gaze, hiding the flicker of sadness in her eyes. "Then go with strength," she said simply. "That is enough for me." He hesitated. "May I come back? To see you again?" Her hands stilled on the net she was mending. "If fate allows it," she repeated, just as she had before. With that, Adrian left. He walked away as quietly as he had come, leaving behind only the broken watch on the shelf, a reminder of the connection they shared. For weeks, life returned to its rhythm. Lila fished at dawn, bartered at the market, and endured the scorn of those who thought themselves above her. She never spoke of Adrian, but at night, when the waves crashed against the shore, she sometimes glanced at the watch and wondered where he had gone. Then, one evening, as the market buzzed with its usual chaos, a murmur spread through the crowd. A man dressed plainly, in clothes simple enough to blend with the fishermen, walked among the stalls. His stride was confident, his eyes searching. Lila was haggling with a merchant when she felt someone watching her. She turned, and there he was, Adrian. Not the fragile man she had rescued, but strong, standing tall, though still dressed like a common traveler. Her heart skipped. "Adrian?" He smiled faintly. "You did not think I would disappear forever, did you?" She blinked, taken aback. "I thought you had gone back to wherever you belong." "Perhaps I have," he said, his eyes steady on hers. "But I also belong here now, at least for a while." The merchant scoffed, interrupting. "Do not waste your time on her, sir. She is nothing more than a fisher girl. She cannot offer you anything." Adrian's expression hardened. "She offered me life when the sea tried to take it. That is more than most can give." The merchant faltered, muttering under his breath, before turning away. Lila stared at Adrian, torn between gratitude and confusion. Later that night, as the moonlight silvered the waves, Adrian joined her by the shore. "I wanted to see you again," he admitted. "Not because I owe you, but because I could not forget you." Lila frowned. "You speak as though I did something extraordinary, but all I did was pull a drowning man from the sea." "That was enough," Adrian said softly. "Enough to change me." She studied him, noticing the way he carried himself, the quiet authority in his voice. He was not like the fishermen, nor the merchants. There was something different about him, something she could not place. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked at last. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Perhaps I want to understand the strength of the girl who faces storms with nothing but her bare hands. Perhaps I want to see the world through your eyes." Lila shook her head, unsure what to make of his words. But as they stood together, the waves rolling in steady rhythm, she felt it again, the invisible thread that bound them since that morning on the beach. Neither spoke of the future, but both knew something had begun that could not be undone. Adrian had returned, and his presence was no longer that of a stranger. It was something deeper, something that would soon reveal truths far greater than either of them could imagine. The days that followed Adrian's return felt different. He came often, sometimes helping Lila with her nets, sometimes simply sitting beside her as she mended them. The villagers whispered behind their hands, speculating who this stranger could be. Some accused Lila of chasing after a man above her station, while others laughed that the fisher girl had finally managed to trap a wandering fool. Lila ignored them, but the sting of their words lingered in her chest. One morning, trouble struck. The docks erupted with shouts as a group of wealthy investors arrived with their guards. They were not from the village, but they carried documents and authority. They claimed the land along the shoreline, including the small strip where Lila's hut stood, belonged to them. They announced plans to build luxury villas, pushing out the fishermen who had lived there for generations. "You have no right," Lila protested, standing firm before them. "My family has lived here all our lives. The sea is our only livelihood." The man leading them sneered. "Your family owes debts. Debts can be collected. And you, fisher girl, have no power to stop us." The crowd gathered, watching as Lila fought back with words, her voice shaking but determined. Adrian stood among them, silent, his jaw tight. He had remained in the shadows of his true identity. But now, the time for silence was ending. When the guards moved to tear down Lila's hut, Adrian stepped forward. "Enough!" His voice rang out, commanding, firm. The investors turned, frowning at the man in simple clothes who dared to interfere. "And who are you to speak against us?" Adrian's eyes locked onto theirs. "I am the one who holds the deed to this land, and I will not see it stolen by greed." Gasps rippled through the villagers. The investors faltered, recognizing him now. Their arrogance melted into unease. Lila froze, staring at him. "What are you saying?" Adrian drew a deep breath. There was no turning back. "My name is Adrian Hale. I am the owner of Hale Enterprises. The land you claim belongs to me, not you, and I will not allow these families to be driven out." Silence fell heavy. The villagers looked at one another in disbelief. Adrian Hale, the name was known even in their small coastal town. He was the businessman whose companies stretched across cities, whose fortune was spoken of in whispers, as though it belonged to another world. Lila's heart pounded. The man she had dragged from the sea, the man she thought was a lost traveler, was a millionaire. The investors stammered, scrambling to backtrack. We were misinformed, Mr. Hale." "Of course. If this land belongs to you—" "It does." Adrian cut them off sharply. "Leave, and do not return." They retreated quickly, their authority crumbling in the face of his name. But while the villagers celebrated, thanking Adrian for protecting them, Lila stood apart. Her hands trembled, and her breath felt caught in her chest. She looked at him not as the man she had cared for in her hut, but as someone entirely different. "You lied to me," she whispered when they were alone. Adrian's expression softened. "I never lied. I simply did not tell you who I was." "That is the same thing," she said, her voice breaking. "All this time, I thought you were just a man who had washed up from the sea. I treated you like one of us. But you are nothing like us." "Lila." Adrian stepped closer, his voice pleading. "I did not hide from you out of malice. I wanted you to see me, not my name, not my wealth. For the first time in my life, someone saved me without knowing who I was. That mattered to me more than anything." She shook her head, tears threatening to fall. "And now what? Do you expect me to believe we are equals? The world will never see us that way." He reached out, but she pulled back. The weight of the revelation pressed between them, heavy and unyielding. The bond that had grown quietly in the shadows of his anonymity now stood exposed to the harsh light of reality. The man she had rescued was no longer just Adrian. He was Adrian Hale, a name that carried power and wealth beyond her comprehension. And though he had revealed his truth to protect her, the distance between them had never felt greater. The village still buzzed with excitement after Adrian revealed who he was. Many of the fishermen celebrated, grateful that their homes and livelihoods were safe because of his intervention. They whispered his name with awe, some even bowing slightly when he passed. But for Lila, the truth felt like a heavy stone in her chest. That night, as the fire crackled inside the hut, she sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Adrian stood nearby, searching for words that might bridge the distance between them. "You are angry with me," he said softly. "I am not angry," Lila replied, though her voice trembled. "I am disappointed. Everything between us feels like a lie now. I saved a stranger, but you are no stranger. You are a man who owns the land I live on, a man the world bows to. Do you see how different that makes us?" Adrian Kelk besudher. "It does not change what you did for me. When I was drowning, you did not see a millionaire. You saw a man fighting for breath. You gave me life when I had nothing. That is what matters." She turned her face away. "The world does not see it that way. Already, they look at me differently. Today, the villagers whispered that I was fortunate to have caught your attention, as if saving your life was a scheme to climb into your world. They will never see me as worthy. And I cannot live with that shame." His voice grew firmer. "Then let them whisper. Let them doubt. I do not care what they think. I care about you." But Lila shook her head. "You can say that because you stand above them all. You do not know what it is like to live every day being judged, being told you are less than everyone else. I cannot pretend this divide does not exist." Her words cut deep, and for once Adrian had no quick answer. He was a man who could silence investors with a word, command respect with his name, yet here he was, powerless against the wound in her heart. Silence filled the hut, broken only by the sound of waves outside. Finally, Lila rose and placed the broken watch in his hand. "Take it back," she whispered. "I cannot carry something that reminds me of promises built on two different worlds." Adrian stared at the watch, his throat tight. "Lila," but she stepped away, her eyes glistening. "Please, leave me tonight." For the first time since he had washed ashore, Adrian did as she asked. He walked into the night, his heart heavy. The bond they had built, fragile and pure, was now clouded by the cruel weight of status and class. And as Lila watched him go, a single tear slid down her cheek. She had saved his life, but she wondered if she had lost a part of her own in the process. The days after Adrian's departure were heavy with silence. Lila returned to her routine, rising before dawn, casting her nets, and bringing her catch to the market. Yet every corner of the village seemed to remind her of him. The whispers had not stopped. Some villagers mocked her, saying she had ruined her chance at fortune. Others scorned her, claiming she had schemed all along. Lila held her head high, but each word cut deeper than the last. One evening, as she carried her baskets back from the market, she found her path blocked by the same men who had once claimed the shoreline. They smirked, surrounding her. "The millionaire has left you," one of them sneered, "and without him, you are nothing but a poor fisher girl again. Give us the deed to your family's hut, or we will make sure you regret defying us." Fear rose in her chest, but she stood her ground. "This land is not yours to take." The man laughed cruelly and raised his hand as if to strike her. But before the blow could fall, a strong voice rang out. "Touch her, and you will answer to me." "Oh." The crowd parted, and there stood Adrian, not in plain clothes this time, but in the full authority of his true self. Guards in Hale Enterprises uniforms flanked him, and his presence carried a weight that silenced the square. The men stammered, their bravado crumbling. Mr. Hale, we did not mean—" "You meant to prey on those who cannot defend themselves," Adrian interrupted coldly. "And I do not tolerate injustice. Not here, not anywhere." He turned to his guards. "Remove them. See to it they never step foot in this village again." The men were dragged away, their protests drowned by the cheers of the fishermen. The villagers, once doubtful of Adrian, now saw him for what he truly was, not just a man of wealth, but a man of action. Adrian then turned to Lila. She stood frozen, torn between relief and confusion. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the broken watch she had returned to him. With careful hands, he placed it back in hers. "This watch is worthless as timekeeping," Adrian said softly, "but priceless as a promise. I do not give it back to you as a symbol of debt. I give it as a vow. I will stand with you, not above you. I will use everything I have, not to change who you are, but to protect the dignity you already carry." The villagers watched, murmuring in awe. For the first time, they saw Lila not as a poor fisher girl, but as someone worthy of standing beside the man they revered. Lila looked down at the watch in her palm, then back at Adrian. His eyes were steady, his voice sincere. Slowly, her defenses began to falter. The man she had saved from the sea was the same man standing before her. Now the difference was that he had chosen not just to reveal his power, but to use it for justice, for her, and for her people. In that moment, the plant he had left with her on the first day, the broken watch, was paid off. What had begun as a token of survival had become a pledge of love and loyalty. The village never looked the same again after that night. Adrian's intervention had driven away the men who tried to steal the land, and his presence had shifted the way people spoke about Lila. Where once there had been mockery and scorn, now there was respect. People greeted her with nods, some even apologizing for the harsh words they had once whispered. But none of that mattered as much as the quiet moment by the shoreline where it had all begun. Lila stood at the edge of the water, the broken watch still in her palm, when Adrian joined her. The sun was sinking into the horizon, painting the sea in shades of gold and crimson. "I never asked for any of this," she said softly, her voice carrying over the waves. "Not your name, not your wealth, not your power." "I know," Adrian replied, "and that is why it matters. Because you saw me as a man before you saw me as anything else, and I cannot forget that." She looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt and hope all at once. "The world will never accept this. They will always say we are too different." "Then let them," Adrian said firmly. "I have spent my life proving things to the world. I do not need to prove this to anyone. I only need to prove it to you." He took the watch from her hand and fastened it gently around her wrist. Though cracked and broken, it gleamed in the last light of the day. "This," he said, "is no longer just a reminder of survival. It is our promise. You saved my life, Lila. Now let me spend the rest of mine proving that I am worthy of that gift." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not born of doubt. Slowly, she nodded. "Then let us face it together. The whispers, the doubts, the storms. If you truly mean this, I will not run." Adrian smiled, and for the first time since that fateful morning, she saw not the millionaire, not the name the world revered, but the man she had pulled from the sea. He reached for her hand, and she let him hold it. The waves crashed softly around their feet, sealing the vow in rhythm with the tide. The place where life had almost ended had now become the place where a new one began, and as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, the fisher girl and the millionaire stood side by side, not as two people from different worlds, but as two hearts bound by fate, justice, and love that no storm could ever break.